What's happening, everybody? Today's June 16th, and this is day 12 of 37 Conversations, and I'm waiting for my friend Jen to hop on. She's coming on in just a second. Thanks for hopping on. Just waiting for Jen, who I'm gonna have a conversation with tonight, to hop on. So what you'll do, Jen, is when you join, if you hop out and then hop back in, you'll see a request come up, something that says request to join the chat, and then just select that. So you might need to hop out and then hop back in. Hey, what's up, Jania? Nancy, how you doing? Dory, how you doing? Let's see, I think Jen's texting me now. Yo, what's up, Brandon? Good, good. Yo, what's happening, Becky? Thanks for sticking around and being patient. Jen's about to request again. Let's see, I think she's gonna be hopping in here in a second. Hey, how y'all doing? Thanks for being patient. Oh, there she goes. She's hopping back in. All right. Ooh, it says she's unable to join. Let's see here. I didn't realize I could do it from my side, Jen. My bad. Hey, what's up?
I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're
I
good.
don't know what happened. Hey, Chris.
Oh
Hey,
no.
everyone.
No, you're good. You're good. No, I didn't realize I could even select it from my side, so that's my bad. That's good for me to know for when I do this again. How you doing? How's it going? What's up?
Fine. I'm now sweating and nervous because I couldn't, because I was late and it was awkward, but I'm
Oh
fine. I'm fine. How are
no.
you?
No, I'm good, man. Just working hard. You having a good work week so far?
Yes, all good.
Yeah,
Busy, but all good.
no doubt. That's cool. That's cool. Well, yeah. Thanks for joining. I mean, I was just mentioning a second ago. Today is June 16th. This is day 12 of 37 conversations, and we're gonna have that much anticipated conversation about white privilege. I've got my friend Jennifer Yeagley. You know, she goes by Jen. I call her Jen. Joining me to have this conversation tonight. I want to give you a moment, Jen, to introduce yourself.
Sure, sure. So yeah, I'm Jen Yeagley. Gosh, Chris and I go back a few years. We're both colleagues in the nonprofit, or were colleagues in the nonprofit sector. Chris is now obviously with a company. I'm currently the CEO of the St. Petersburg Free Clinic. I used to be the executive director of Community Tampa Bay, which is an anti-discrimination organization. I've been involved in community-based, equity-related nonprofit work for about 20 years. And I'm also on the board of the Plus Project with Chris, which focuses on funding organizations that serve marginalized populations within the LGBTQ plus community. I'm a Leadership Tampa grad, and I'm the mom of a 2-year-old. So I'm
Okay.
hiding in my bedroom so that I don't get interrupted. So if you see pillows behind me, that's why.
No doubt. That's what's up. Yeah, shout out to Langston, my man Corbin for sure. Yeah, so I just want to get into it a little bit, Jen. So as you know, we've been having these conversations. I mean, specifically you and me, and we've always talked about equity and inclusion and such, and of course diversity. And I wanted to have this conversation series to put it out there for my friends and followers and such, and kind of just encourage, right, encourage them to have conversations about race, about this moment that we're in. Um,
Yeah.
this moment's definitely it's hitting different. You know what I'm saying? Like someone like yourself that's in this space, I don't need to school you on it. The killing of unarmed, people of color in this country is nothing new. However, with the, not even emergence. I mean, Black Lives Matter has been happening, but with the just explosion I feel of it, and then also just the national just focus on it. And maybe, I mean, this isn't something I was thinking about asking you about, but maybe you can provide your thoughts on it. But this moment feels different, you know what I mean? And so I
Yeah.
wanted to be able to, have a conversation series about 37 topics and such. Um, and this is day 12, so some of the other conversations have gained traction, and people have been sending topic ideas, and talking about, well, you got to cover white privilege, you got to cover white privilege, and of course that was always going to be on deck, but there's no way I was going to have that conversation or dialogue without bringing you into it. So I wanted to get your perspective on it. I mean, what's your perspective about on, like, where we are as a country right now in this Black Lives Matter movement, and just everything that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if I'm not mistaken, Black Lives Matter was born following the murder of Mike Brown in Ferguson back in
Right.
2014. And so this is a 6-year-old movement, and it's not new. And for those of us who, were either aware of it, involved with it, or part of the movement over this time, it's been so interesting to see the evolution because back in 2014, 2015, the organization I was with at the time, we came out in support of Black Lives Matter. And I remember, back then I had board members, and this was a social justice organization. I had certain board members that were really uncomfortable with our aligning ourselves with that movement
Right.
because they felt that it was divisive and, oh, what about all lives matter? And, we can get into that later. But, you
Right.
know, and so it was it's very different now. I think that, we're seeing everyone from like the NFL to Amazon
Yeah.
to every major corporation you can name to organizations hashtagging Black Lives Matter, coming out with statements. More on that later, or you've
Yeah.
probably covered that,
Yeah.
the statement versus action. But so it's not controversial in the way that it felt 6 years ago. Now, mind you, it never should have been, never was controversial. It's just the way that it landed with white folks, and kind of with the broader population that made it so. So that's what feels really different about this moment is that the shift in tone around it. Now that doesn't mean that there's still not a big segment, of white people who are still out there, waving the All Lives Matter banner and angry about this, surge in broader support for the movement. But it just does feel different. It's like a friend of mine I was talking to today shared that her take on it is that people have been home because of COVID, and they are tuned into social media and the news and kind of the world around them in a way that maybe folks aren't on a day-to-day basis. And so there is more time and space to engage and reflect in a way that maybe without this pandemic would not be there. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that may be contributing to just a wider population sort of being more reflective about the issues, about racism and about the movement in general.
No, I agree. No, I agree with that. No, it's definitely different, and certainly I wouldn't wish, coronavirus on anybody.
Right.
It could certainly be, the fact that it's catching fire in a different way now as a result of that.
Right.
Being more attuned and not being, I guess you could say, busy in the way that we were when the world was completely open and such. So,
Right.
as it relates to like white privilege and everything like that, I'm saying, of course, being a person of color, there's a marginalization that you experience, and certainly, it's, there's some intersections with that, right? Whether it's socioeconomic, whether you're LGBTQ, housing issues, education, access to education, healthcare, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of, we can unpack there. We can talk about this for hours actually, but so certainly, when I try to have that conversation with my friends about white privilege, especially my white counterparts, it's a matter of, first kind of, trying to make sure that they understand, have a feeling, and have a sense for, systemic racism, and, in that regard. But then also just even socially,
Right.
just socially, the manner in which, perceptions and just bias, prejudice, racism, how that all plays into the equation as well, right? And what do you think about that? Like, as far as I think it's safe to say, we can all agree, white privilege exists. You know what I mean? Like, so when you speak to your friends about it, when you speak about about white privilege, like how do you frame that? Like, what's that like?
Well, so it's so interesting that you say we can all agree. Um, Maybe those of us tuned into this Instagram live feed might agree.
Right.
I can tell you unequivocally, we don't all agree that white privilege exists. And as an
Right.
example of that, as I mentioned, I'm the CEO of the St. Petersburg Free Clinic, and we put out our newsletter last last Friday, and it was we had our equity statement up there that we had crafted, and then we also talked a little bit about the landscape in which we provide services, which includes disproportionality when it comes to generational poverty. Black people experiencing generational poverty at a disproportionate rate as compared to white folks. And this is like data. This is not, we didn't make it up because it sounds good right now. It's literal data.
Right.
So we included some of those statistics and basically, said that our position is that, we will work to use our platform to advance an end, I don't think we said end, but basically to, interrupt systemic racism and to do what we can as an organization, both internally and externally, to do that. And that's basically our stance. And so I did get a response from someone who was very sad and disappointed because all lives matter. And it doesn't matter if you're white, black, purple, or orange, that everybody experiences challenges. And I think that so when we talk about, people not understanding white privilege, there are a lot of white folks who think that when we say there's white privilege, it means that you have not experienced challenges in your life because you're white.
Right.
And the simplest way to break that down, and it's oversimplistic, but the simplest way to break that down is, of course you have. It's just that your race is not making it any harder for you.
Right.
So,
Right.
like, of course, we've all experienced interpersonal and all kinds of challenges in our lives, but I'm white. So, me being like that, my race doesn't make it harder for me. And we look at that from, like, you had mentioned there's a systems level to that. And then there's just a social kind of interpersonal level to that.
Yep.
So, when I get pulled over by a cop, there is never a time that I am worried I am going to lose my life.
Right.
When you get pulled over by a cop, I imagine you are worried every time that you're going to maybe not
Right.
walk away from that encounter.
Sure.
That's because of systemic bias in law enforcement. My son, who is, biracial and looks black, is more likely to get sent to like baby preschool detention, which I didn't even know was a thing, when he starts school because of what he looks like, as opposed to the little kid sitting next to him who's white, because of systemic bias in education. So white kids have privilege there. White people have privilege there. So there's these systems that are set up that then individuals feed into. And then, of course, just interpersonally. Band-Aid in 2020 just decided to make different toned Band-Aids.
Yep.
Up until literally, I think this week, you could only ever buy a Band-Aid that matched my skin tone.
Yep.
So that's like a small thing, but when you magnify it across, 10 million things, it becomes very, very big. And so I think that those are the things that I talk to, when I interrupt that among, white folks that I talk to who just don't get it, or they're like, is that really a thing? And I don't really have advantage and I don't really have privilege. It's sharing those examples that really help to articulate that it really is a thing.
Yeah, I like that. And like, it's interesting because, when I'm having these conversations with people about like the movement and like Black Lives Matter and, the intersectionality that exists there and such, and then even talking about white privilege and everything, it's sometimes I'm challenged. I'm challenged because it's like, if you're someone, you don't have to even be an adult, but say, most of those conversations are with adults, right? they've lived this moment. They've lived, Rodney King. They've lived with Tasha Harlins. They've lived, Eric Garner, even more recently. They've lived, Trayvon Martin. They've lived these experiences, right? They've lived in society when, we're talking about racial profiling. They've lived when we've heard about the, you know, controversial like stop and frisk. They've lived when they've, talked, they've seen instances in which, people are being detained at the border and so on. Like, why do you think some of our white counterparts have a challenge with like seeing like or understanding white privilege, even if they say, for instance, have not lived in a community that is blended or whatever the case may be? Sometimes that further frustrates me, especially when you're speaking to people that you consider to be attuned to current events because of
Yeah.
everything I just said, right? Like it's like they've experienced, they've heard of these concepts, they've seen the news, they've seen this national discussion, even sometimes local discussion as it relates to race and such. But even then, people push back against white privilege. I don't know if it's white guilt. I don't know what it is, but like, what do you think about that?
It's sociological, right? So it's several things. One, I mean, it's that if I admit that white privilege, if I admit to myself that white privilege exists and that as a white person, I gain advantages because of the system of white supremacy, then that makes me complicit in that by
Right.
my very existence. That's a reality. So like, but, and so then my job is to say, so I'm complicit in this because I am white. So it's not my fault, but it is a reality. So
Right.
then I have to do my work to dismantle that in my own way. I can't take on the whole world, but I have to figure out what does it mean for me as a person to work to subvert white supremacy so that we can work toward equity. And we're talking now like about the average, like good white person, not like someone who we know is for real racist, right? So like
Right.
this is like the average person who is like, I don't get it and I'm not
Yep.
racist, all that. So in admitting it to myself, then that means I now have to do work. And it means that some of the things I uncover about myself may be uncomfortable. And it means that there may be some things that I have to give up in order to work toward equity. And then that becomes scary because what if now, when there's equity, that means I'm going to be less competitive for that job because now we have an equitable system where the black person or the other person of color sitting next to me is as equally likely to get that job because all of our backgrounds are the same and I am not automatically advantaged because I'm white. It's kind of a bad example, but you know what I
I
mean?
did.
It's like
I referenced that last night in my conversation. Yeah.
there really is, people talk about like the old way of looking at anti-discrimination is a rising tide lifts all boats and we can all hold hands and sing and everybody's happy when everybody's equal. But the reality is equity is based on power dynamics.
Yep.
And so in order for you to have more power in society, it means I have to give some up.
Yep.
And that is the reality of equity. And so as white folks, when we start to really unpack privilege and power and white supremacy, it is, there's no way around our, complicity in that, and then figuring out, well, what do we need to do so that I limit my power so that you can have more. And then, again, it becomes like, oh, I'm going to lose and I can't feed my family and all of these fear-based ideas that aren't really grounded in reality, that are grounded in fear. And so I think that's part of it. I think that white fragility is a real thing.
Yep.
So like, and that's, that sociological concept that has been studied and documented that says like, the very indication, that somebody may have bias, like a white person may have bias or may be engaged in some racist thinking or like causes so much stress that they shut down, can't even engage in a conversation, become totally defensive, and like lose their minds. And so then that shuts things down before we can even get anywhere. And that is a real thing because as white folks, we've been taught that we should never be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
My comfort is always a priority. And so in order for us to move toward equity, I can't prioritize my comfort over your freedom. And until white people get comfortable with discomfort in the interest of freedom for our brothers and sisters of color, then we're not going to get there. But that's kind of where I think white people, really have a lot of work to do, myself included. I mean, just because, I can say these words and I've studied and I've done some work does not absolve me from continuous reflection and ongoing work and interrogating my own biases.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, that's just because you're woke and you're aware. You know what I'm saying? Like you're on the other end of the continuum as it relates to people not getting this discussion. So that's not, I feel you on that. So in your perspective, like how can our white counterparts leverage that privilege? Like how can they be better allies? Because um, I was really frustrated, after George Floyd's murder. I have friends, and I've even seen some of them even log on to this live. I've had friends that are white, right? Or, due to colorism, they're perceived as being white, even though they're not, they're
Right.
Latinx. And, some of their friends of color, right, are saying, oh, you need to be quiet, in some respects,
Mm,
for some, you need to be, this isn't your fight. I'm paraphrasing here, but you can't be a part of this, or this isn't for you, or you're white, what do you know, whatever. Now,
right.
what I've told my friends that are in that that have come to me about that or whatever, and that was even before we started this series. I told them, this is my personal opinion. I'm not sure what your thoughts are about this, Jen, but I said no. I would tell them, like, no community activist, no organizer is going to ever say that building bridges or coalitions with people that don't look like us is not a good thing. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And if you have I consider those people to be fake woke. You know what I'm saying? Because it's it's not, if you think that this is a fight or a movement that we can do on our own, or partake in on our own, then we're kidding ourselves. Not to mention the fact that, I mean, let's just look at the the structures of society, right? I think there was a conversation I had the other night about contradictions and hypocrisies and
Hmm.
ironic statements and such. Like, how can you believe in institutional and systemic racism, but then say you don't want to be in, you don't want white people to be your ally? That makes no
Yeah.
sense to me, right? So I think that some of that is short sighted. I think in some respects, I can understand. I try to always understand where someone's coming from. You know what I'm saying? So I
Right.
think I can kind of understand when those people are, sharing those sentiments, when they are saying those things. It might be from a place of distrust, or from a
Yeah.
place of image politics, or because they heard lip service before, or people want to do a post on Instagram but they don't follow through or whatever. I get that, but
Yep.
so that's a long kind of like lead up as to say, so as far as like leveraging privilege and being those strong allies and such for people who are in that space of being able to come along and be able to activate and such. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, first, I mean, everything you said is completely accurate, and or right. I mean, I agree with that, and I think that I would defer, to Black folks on what the role of white people needs to be in this movement, and so I think that following, the leadership of folks who don't look like me and what is required is of me is step one. Um, but let's pretend we had that conversation, or like we've had that conversation over the years, or I've had that conversation with, um, with my Black friends and colleagues and family members. So I have a little bit of insight into, what might be expected of me. Um, and everybody has a lane. And
Yeah.
so, like, it is important for me to pick my lane and to understand what my lane is, and then to do everything I can within that. So, for example, I have a lot of friends who have, for many years and continue to protest, and their work is in the streets, and they are part of, the movement in the streets. That has never been my lane. I support it. I appreciate it. I love what is happening. It is effective. It needs to keep happening. But for a lot of different reasons, um, not the least of which is I can also be there to bail folks out if they get arrested because I wasn't at the protest.
Right. Right. No
you
doubt.
know, but like it's just not my lane. Um, but as a leader of an organization, as one example, um, my job is to listen to people of color in my organization, one, around policy, empowering policies, equitable policies, to put those policies in place, to look at our recruitment and hiring practices, to intentionally hire people of color, to intentionally advance people of color in leadership positions, to make sure that my board is representative, to make sure that there is voice and inclusion. And at every level of the organization, to ensure that I am listening to the lived experiences of people who don't look like me and allowing that to inform the way that we conduct ourselves. And, importantly, like paying people competitive wages and not allowing, like not, allowing race to be a factor in that, and being aware that it often is, and being aware. And so those are some examples as a leader. I'm a Leadership Tampa graduate, and I've gotten, I got tapped by the class of 2020 to facilitate a conversation, around bias and privilege and race. And so, for me, like, that's the type of thing where I feel like, oh, I can do that. I've been trained to do that. And if I can help facilitate a conversation around, who are in these cases are largely white leaders in our community, then that is learning that I can help be a part of, help to impart for folks who are then going to go into their organizations and hopefully learn some best practices about how they can be allies. And just thinking about interrupting bias and racism every time you come across it. I had a situation at the church I go to where, like, one of the security guards I felt like he was profiling my husband because he was carrying, he wanted to know what was in his bag. Well, it was our diaper bag. And there were about 10 other people around who also had a backpack.
Yep.
And so I promptly, text the pastor after service and was like, hey, man, this wasn't good. Like, do we need to do some, how can I support doing some training around equity and inclusion at the church, because it's a diverse, church, and it was not cool. And so, just interrupting it, I think is another example. So those are a few things that I choose to do because those are in my sphere, in my realm. And that's what I think every white person needs to do, is to look at, where do you have power, and to not be uncomfortable with evaluating that, really say, like, do you, in your family, are you someone who people look up to and listen to? And if that's true, then how can you advance conversations around racial equity in your family, so that then your family are becoming allies and advocates? Do you have power at work? Do you have power to hire? If you have power to hire and to pay people, that is a critically important role, because so much of what we see in terms of, systemic racism is intertwined with just generational wage equity issues.
Yep.
And folks not getting paid the same, and not being able to amass wealth and pass on wealth in the same ways that white folks have been able to. So those are extraordinarily powerful positions. And it's looking at, where you have power. And if you're a lot of folks who are younger, if you're a student, if you're youth, if you're, maybe not in a place yet where you're in those positions, even though there are students who have, great power in the student body and all of that, it is still looking at, how do you be an advocate, with your fellow students? How do you join a group that can advance conversations, or lead a group, that can advance conversations in your school? Go out to protest, there's so many things that we can choose from. Also educate yourself, read, there's so many great anti-racism resources out there. So step one, really backing up, is just regularly consuming literature and podcasts and conversations led by folks of color to understand those perspectives. I know that, and I'm going on and on, but I want to share that, when I got to college, one of the reasons I got into equity work was that I looked around, and I went to a really diverse high school and had that great experience growing up of being around a lot of diversity. But I got to college and realized that there was like a whole body of literature that I never tapped into or knew about, because it was literature by Black folks, or by Black women in particular, or Latinx folks who weren't considered part of, the curriculum of literature that you're taught in high school. There were broad swaths of our history as a country that was whitewashed.
Yep.
I didn't know who Ida Wells was. I didn't know who Elaine Brown was. Like, there were people, it's like these heroes where it's like, who are these people? I've never heard of them. And so it was at that time that I just got really passionate about learning about, oh my God, there's so much about this whole world that I don't know anything about, because I never got exposed to it. And that is the education of all of us. And it is still that way. So unless we seek those things out, we're not going to learn it in school. We're not going to learn it, and maybe it's getting better now. I mean, it's been a full, 3 decades since I've been in high school, but I mean, it's really like seeking out those resources and being around people who aren't like you, learning, making friends and having real conversations, and having those, cross-cultural interactions with meaningful cross-cultural interaction, so that we can build those deep friendships and really learn to empathize more, I think, with people we care about, to understand, gosh, this is how this affects you, Chris. I never knew. And I feel, I feel it.
Right.
And now I am that much more motivated to stand in solidarity with you.
Yeah, that's what's up. No, I agree with all of that. I mean, you hit on themes that I talked about through some of the conversations too about education and the importance of like educating yourself, and if you have a purview or concepts or lens on social equity, social justice, like imparting that knowledge on other people around you. The lack of education in our school system as it relates to the the significant impact of people of color in this country, even dating back to slavery. So our economies were built on the backs of people of color in this
Yep.
country, and it's kind of glossed over as it relates to history books and some people's experiences. I can speak to in my experience as well. So no, I feel you. No, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. No, that's great. So what do you? I'm curious about this because we have not had this conversation. So um, you referenced Langston earlier and such, and I think it was like the third or fourth conversation I had with my dad about the conversation that um, parents have with their children of color and so on and so forth like that, and just engagements with law enforcement and just my as my dad talks about it, he says we have different rules of engagement as it relates with the police and then just in society in general and such. Where's your head at around that? I mean, I know you're attuned to all of this kind of stuff. I'm curious about your perspectives on that.
It's such a good question, and so he's 2, and so a lot of his learning right now is just around, pee pee in the potty, and
Right.
not we're not talking about racism yet.
Right.
But on the other hand, I mean, it can't come too early, and we want to normalize talking about race and the implications of race in our house because that's how Corbin and I talk and interact. Having said that, I truly am on a whole new journey of education for how to be. It's one thing for me to be a white person in a social justice space and speak as a friend and a colleague, an accomplice, to peers, or even to youth or to even family members. It is a very another thing to think about what is my role as a parent, and how do I responsibly parent my child, and so I don't know. I mean, I'm learning, and I know, of course, that um, of course, there's all the just you're both of these things. You are black and white, but you look black, so this is how the world's going to interact with you, and having real conversations about that, because the world's not going to look at my son. Who any of you have seen pictures of my cute son? Nobody's going to look at him and mistake him for being white. They're
Right.
just not. And so it's being grounded in reality about what that means.
Yep.
That the world is going to see him in a certain way because of that. And then Corbin and I have talked about, because he has lived so much of what, I mean, I hope Langston won't experience, but we have to prepare for that he might. So
Sure.
Corbin has had been pulled out of his car by a cop and had a gun held to his head,
Yep. Yep.
for literally no reason. I mean, not there's ever a reason for that, but for no reason. And has had to navigate situations like that, and has had to navigate being suspended, multiple times in school for being called a racial epithet, knocking somebody out, and then he's the one that's, suspended or expelled
Right.
for that, so these issues that frequently. And so I think that, we agree that because of his lived experience, he is the most qualified, to lead those conversations. But my role in terms of, supporting that and validating that and making sure that we as parents show up for Langston um, in a way that lets him know that we are always going to support you and be there for you. And we understand that racism is real. And when you react to it, like we're going to stand, when you make decisions about how you need to navigate your life based on that, we're going to be behind you. And we're going to be there to advocate for you and to try to put you in the best situations we can, so that we're really being your advocates as parents. And when we talk a lot about when he starts school, it's critical that he goes to a diverse school, because we don't want him to be the only child of color in his classroom.
Right. Right.
That was Corbin's experience. He was the only black child in an all white school, and it was horrendous for him. So, and it just that changed over time. He went to a more diverse school later in his life, but so he knows firsthand the experience of that. So we know, like, we want to put you in a school where you've got all kinds of kids, kids who look like mommy and kids who look like daddy and everything in between. So he really gets those perspectives. So that's like one example of what we're prioritizing. And then I think, giving him tools along the way for how to, and I don't know, I mean, it's such a, I don't know,
Love
but
it,
I
trial
also
by
have
fire.
to,
Yeah, for sure.
I
Yeah.
have to learn and I have to read up and I have to, you know, do my own work in that way, to figure out how to be the best parent, to a biracial child.
Yeah, one of the things that you were talking about too, just kind of reemphasizes some of my feelings about intentionality. You know what I mean? Like even in the sense of you speak. I mean, certainly, this is your first child and such. So there's a matter of
Only,
only.
only.
Okay, all right.
To be clear.
No doubt, no doubt. So like you haven't been down this path before, so there's certainly a lot of learning, on the job training, OJT that you're doing. But as it relates to this race discussion, there's a lot of intentionality as it relates to having conversations with people, as you mentioned, that don't look like you. I talked about that as
Mhm.
well. Educating yourself, right? Being aware, you know what I mean? I think let's be real about life. That's what the whole concept of being woke is, you know what I'm saying? Because like that's going back to the white privilege, conversation, going back to this whole Black Lives Matter movement and conversation, in some respects debate. It really shocks me that some people act as if their head's been underneath in the sand, underneath a rock or something all this time, as if they don't understand the struggles and challenges, even counter to their persons of color counterparts, right? So, I think there's a lot of intentionality there, and I think it's really important for just people. Let's just say what it is. White people to just identify that, listen. I think that's something that you always. I learned from you a lot, and that you always embody and emphasize. The importance of just listening, letting those voices be centered, and
Mhm.
ensuring that we are doing what we can to be allies, and so on and so forth. And again, this conversation is complex. I mean, this matter is
Right.
complex, and there's intersectionality and so on and so forth with it. But I think this was an awesome conversation tonight.
Thank you.
This
Yeah, it
was
was awesome to be here. Can I do a couple of pro tips for what not to do for white folks?
no,
Because
do
we
it.
talked a lot about just really quick,
Oh yeah, for
like
sure.
top whatever what not to do. Colorblind is not a thing.
Yeah, for
Do
sure.
not be
I don't see
colorblind.
color.
That
I
is
don't see
it is
color. Yeah,
it is racist to say
yeah.
that. That is racist.
Mhm.
Um, don't center yourself. It is not about you, white people. Nobody wants to see you crying about George Floyd's death. I mean, it is tragic. And
Yeah,
if you need to cry, I get it. It's sad. We all need to go away somewhere, close the door. Black people don't need to swim through your tears to get to allyship. So like, dude, it's not about you. Quit centering yourself. Reverse racism, also not a thing. Racism is a sociological concept that is power, right? Privilege and power plus an element of prejudice. Prejudice is real interpersonally, but reverse racism is not a thing. So black people can't be racist against white folks. So let's not do that. Like, that's not real. Let's see what else. What are some other good ones, Chris? What else should white people not do? Pro tips.
oh yeah,
Pro tips for what not to do.
that's a good thing.
Um,
I
those
like
are
that.
like top three, though. Those are really good.
Yeah,
Colorblind's not a thing. Reverse racism
I don't
isn't a
see
thing.
color. Yeah, I hate that.
And it's just not about you. And also I feel like white people need to check our defensiveness and
Yeah,
to just learn how to
that's the
take
fragility. That's the fragility piece. Yeah,
fragility, right? So if somebody, if somebody checks you and is like, hey, that, Chris, if you check me, you're like, Jen, that don't do that. Like, that's not what you just did is not okay. My job is to say, I'm so sorry. And then keep it moving. I
yep.
don't have to engage you in a conversation for 10 minutes about what and why and further burden you, exactly. And I see a comment here, to teach me about why what I just did was not cool. I have to educate myself,
Yep.
so it is not your burden to educate me. Oh, here's another good one. Sarah's saying, stop asking people of color for tips on where you should start. I don't know if I'm supposed to do that. I might have just stepped all over you reading the comments because I'm not
No,
the
you're
host.
good. No, you're good. No,
Like,
you
yes,
are good.
these are all so good. Like, don't, where do you start? Whatever. Like, there's a thing called Google.
Yeah.
Go Google it. Google is amazing. Google didn't exist when I was, 20. I can go Google how to like figure stuff out. Go do that. Like it's a perfect tool. So those are just pro tips for
A
where to
big
start.
a big pro tip that you asked me, a big pro tip of mine is, if you're a white person, don't tell a person of color how someone else is not racist against them. You just
Right?
go towards them. I that's just
Right?
I can't grasp that. And like even in my contradictions and hypocrisies and ironies conversation I had the other night, one of the things I referenced was, how can, and even in this concept, you know what I mean? Like I'm not of Native American heritage. I'm not Native by any stretch, but um, I've had a lot of conversations with friends of mine who are white, who they're like, "Oh, the Washington Redskins, that's not offensive. You can't say that. How can you
You
even?
can't say that.
How can you?
Right.
How can you say that that's not offensive when you don't even embody any of
That's right.
That's right. So not to not that goes to say that doesn't mean to say that a single person who's Native or a single person who's Black or a single person that's Latinx or a person of color is the voice for the entire community. But
Right.
I can confidently say, I mean, I think, I don't have any empirical evidence here that a matter such as that, though, broadly speaking, people would have offense to that. So my point that I'm making to you is that,
Because
like,
it's racist.
yeah, yeah,
Yes. It's
that's my, that's,
100%.
yeah,
Also, if you tell me, hey, Jen, this happened to me, blah, blah, blah. And I know, like that was, man, like I was experiencing racism at work and here, this and that. I should not at any point ever say to you, well, Chris, maybe it was this.
right.
Maybe, or maybe you said something to them that like or maybe you took it the wrong way. That is not okay. Like if
Right.
you are telling me about your experience and your perception or your experience of racism, it is not my job to discount that.
Oh God, Sarah hit it too. So Sarah in the comments, she's made a comment about that.
Oh, yes.
I love it. Your
Proximity.
proximity
Yes.
to your proximity to someone of color does not mean that you
Not
can't
make
be racist. Yeah, I'm
if
not
I had
racist.
it,
My
I
dad's
have a
best friend
black
is black.
friend.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
I had a nickel for how many people I had to comment on Facebook threads in the last 2 weeks about literally your proximity to black folks does not make you not racist. My partner, even people we are married to, people we our spouses, our partners, or whatever, you can still be racist and have a black child, a black partner, a black best friend.
I'm gonna say it right now. Okay, I'm not. I've shied away, and I've said it in some of my previous conversations that I'm not trying to make any of this political, and this is not a political statement by any stretch. But Mitch McConnell is married to an Asian woman, right? I think, or I think he is racist. Okay,
He Yes,
so that's a perfect example. That's a living example of what we're talking about. Your proximity
right.
to someone of color does not mean that you're not racist.
My friend Sarah with an H nailed it years ago. Her comment was, and she's on here, so now I'm shouting her out again. She said, there are all kinds of misogynists who are married to women.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like the same concept.
yep.
There's all kinds of people out there who, they're again, your proximity or relationship alone does not make you
It's like
not
it
racist.
absolves them from it, or it makes them
Right.
immune to to holding
Right.
an ideal. So
Yep. Yep.
absolutely,
Wow. I could go on.
yeah, me too, me
I
too. I
could
could too.
always.
I loved it. Well, I think I'll wrap it up, Jen. You know what I'm saying? Is there anything else you want to share? Oh, Officer Chauvin is married to an Asian woman.
Yep.
I did not
I
know
did
that.
see that.
I
That's
did.
my girl Cindy, by the way, who I don't know if it's appropriate for me to do this, but
Of
she and I
course.
grew up together. We went to
Okay.
elementary school together on up through
Oh, that's
high
what's up.
school. Yep. Yep. What's up, Cindy?
I love it. I
Thanks for
love it.
tuning in. Anyway.
Oh yeah, she filed for divorce quick, Jania. That's my one of my
Hmm.
one of my girls from back in the day. She's the big sister of two guys I played ball with. But yeah, most definitely. We went to school in Hawaii. But yeah, no, yeah, she did. She filed for divorce with the quickness though. But this was great. I mean, depending on some of the other topics and such, Jen, I might have to bring you back. You know what I mean? This is awesome.
Oh, I would be happy to anytime. This is I mean, you know me. I
Oh
love
yeah,
having the opportunity to
you're
talk,
just
have these
Philo.
conversations. So
Yeah,
thank
this
you
is your
so
vibe.
much.
Oh, without a doubt, I love you. And what I'll do is,
Love you
for
too.
everyone that joined, I'm gonna post this on Instagram, so it'll be on my IGTV, it'll be on my page. Oh, Jenny's in Hawaii right now. That's what's up. It'll be on my IGTV on my page. You can, please comment in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'll make sure that Jen's handle is up there as well. She is a champion of this work, equity, justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, everything like that. So,
Nah,
no,
just
You're
Just
humble.
playing my role. No, I'm just playing, I'm doing the least I can do, literally, which is all, what all of us white folks need to be doing. So thank you, Chris.
Oh, without a doubt, Jen. Without a doubt. Well, you have
All
a
right,
good night.
y'all.
I'll talk to you soon. All right. Tell the family I said what's up. Give them hugs and kisses and stuff.
All right. Bye, y'all.
All right. See ya.
Take care.